You're listening to Holy Health, the podcast that brings you the latest in health ideas and technology across the spectrum of fields. While ultimately our fate is up to God, how we get there is determined by us. As it says in Kohelet, there is nothing new under the sun. We get that everything can be found in Torah. Our goal is to empower you with knowledge that may help you make better lifestyle choices. This podcast has been brought to you by Musach Haguf Physical Therapy and Personal Training Studio. Our motto is fixing the past in order to build the future. You can find us on Instagram at Musach Haguf.
Hey guys, okay, I'm not quite positive if this will be the last episode before Pesach or if I will put out one more episode before Pesach. I have not quite decided. You guys may notice that I'm going between once a week and once every other week, though I do have a lot of episodes. I'm working very hard behind the scenes with a number of different influencers and some big rabbis who are going to be coming on and doing some of the Torah extros as well. I'm really working hard to try to promote this podcast more and more. We were really on an upward trend pre-October 7th. That dipped a little bit afterwards, and now the numbers are coming back up. So you guys can really help out by following us on Spotify, on YouTube, on Apple, really wherever you listen to podcasts. But those are the big three. And by continuing to share these episodes with anyone that you guys think may enjoy this combination of health and Torah. I'm really excited for you guys to hear this week's episode. I spoke with Dr. Ovadia pretty soon after October 7th. So this has kind of been in the vault for, I guess, 5 or 6 months, ready to come out and just looking for the right person to do the extro, which Malka Hubscher did for me a few weeks ago. And ironically, here we are right before Pesach, and I'm excited for you guys to hear what Malka had to say because it kind of ties in with this holiday that's upcoming as well. And I'd like to remind you guys that if anybody knows anybody looking to donate or help people here in Israel, I am trying to match donors with different soldiers who need physical therapy, some of whom really cannot afford to pay for it. So if there's anybody that you guys know that may be looking to help soldiers or how they could help here in Israel. Obviously, at this point, the soldiers really have the equipment they need. They have the clothing they need. We're going back towards summer, but there are a lot that have come back from the front lines, and there are a lot who really need physical therapy. So if I can match some of these donors with some of these soldiers, that would be a really, really wonderful thing. So if you know of anyone, please give them my number or my email and have them reach out, or you can reach out. And again, if there is any stucco organization or charitable organization that you guys would like me to speak about, I'm happy to do that. Reach out to me. If anyone is interested in sponsoring this podcast for an episode in memory or in honor of someone, please reach out as well. And I hope you guys enjoy this week's episode. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Holy Health. My guest today is Dr. Philip Ovadia. Dr. Ovadia grew up in New York and graduated from the Accelerated Pre-Med Med program at the Pennsylvania State University and the Jefferson Medical College. This was followed with a residency in general surgery at the University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey and a fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery at Tufts, the New England School of Medicine, the New England Medical School. He's practiced cardiothoracic surgery in Beaver, Pennsylvania and Clearwater, Florida. He started Ovadia Cardiothoracic Surgery in 2020, working as an independent contractor throughout the United States. In 2021, he launched the Ovadia Heart Health, offering a virtual clinic to people all over the world. The focus is the prevention and treatment of heart disease by modifying diet and lifestyle. Today, he lives in Florida with his wife and 2 daughters. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's great to be here with you. Really excited for this podcast discussion.
Me too. Thank you so much. I heard you a couple of months ago. I don't remember which podcast it was, but I heard you speaking on somebody else's podcast, and I was like, I need to speak to him because you were really speaking my language. But I guess before we get into what you do differently, than other cardiothoracic surgeons. Can you tell me a little bit about your own background and your own journey into how you created the lifestyle that you do live today?
Yeah, sure thing. So, you kind of went through some of my history there, in terms of my professional background. I've now been a heart surgeon for 20 years, done over 3,000 heart surgeries. But for much of that time, I was a very unhealthy heart surgeon. I had reached a point where, I was morbidly obese, I was pre-diabetic, and I realized that I was going to end up on my own operating table. I was walking down that same path that so many of my patients had followed. And like so many of them, I really didn't know how to, change. I was following the advice that I had learned to give, and it's the advice that we've all heard: eat less, move more, eat a low-fat diet. And it wasn't working for me. And I was recognizing that it wasn't working for my patients either. I started to, ask some different questions. I started to think about things a little differently and got introduced to some different information, quite frankly, from outside of the traditional medical system. And I eventually, started a low carbohydrate diet, eliminated sugar from my diet, and I was able to lose a lot of weight, and importantly, maintain that weight loss, which is something I hadn't been able to do in the past. And I came to realize that, we were failing to recognize the true root cause of heart disease. And we were really going about the treatment and prevention strategy all wrong. So that's led me to kind of add an additional focus to my career. I continue to work as a heart surgeon, but I'm increasingly focused on helping people how not to need heart surgery. I wrote a book. It's been out a couple of years now. It's called Stay Off My Operating Table. And that really is my mantra now. I want people to stay off my operating table. That's the mission that I'm on.
Which is amazing because listen, I'm a physical therapist, and we would always say, well, the orthopedists want to operate because that's their job. If they're not operating, like, how are they going to make their money? So, you would think the same of a cardiothoracic surgeon. Okay, so first question I want to ask you might seem a little bit, I don't know, maybe different. I don't know, maybe you've been asked this. You said, that you were very overweight for years. Was it hard for you as an overweight physician to look at your patients and say, you need to diet and lose weight? That must not have been easy.
Well, I guess I would say it wasn't hard for me, but I'm not sure how well they received it. But you're right. And unfortunately, this is fairly common. When you look at the overall health of physicians and nurses and, people in the medical profession, it's not any better than the general public. But it's a basic question we should be asking more. If you, the practitioner, can't keep yourself healthy, how are you going to help your patients be healthy? And I think it's emblematic of our approach in medicine, which is, the general thinking is we're here to take care of sick people. We're not here to keep them from getting sick in the first place. But there's so much more power in keeping people from being sick in the first place. So the reality is that I didn't think about it much back then, but I do, looking back, realize how problematic that was.
Yeah, no, I just figured it probably was, but I thought I'd hear from you. So you said some really interesting things. I heard you talk a lot, what is the standard way that the world sort of looks at who is more likely to have heart problems is usually looking at blood pressure and looking at cholesterol. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So, we know, of course, that heart disease is the number one killer, and that's true here in the US, and it's true worldwide. So here in the US is really where this focus on heart disease started. If we go back to the early 1900s, heart disease is a very rare disease. Leading physicians of the time from the US, from Europe, worldwide, who would publish their sort of lifetime experiences, lifetime, patient experiences, and they would barely mention heart disease. Like it was essentially non-existent. Throughout the early 1900s, here in the US, we started to see a significant rise in the incidence of heart disease. And this really hit a, crisis point in the 1950s when the sitting president of the United States had a heart attack while in office, President Eisenhower. And, this appropriately set off the alarm bells. And there was a lot of, resources, scientific resources put behind what is causing heart disease. And, there were two prevailing theories. One was that it was primarily sugar, and the other was that it was cholesterol and dietary saturated fats. For various reasons that, weren't purely scientific, I'll say, the dietary fat, the cholesterol theory sort of won out and got promoted as the primary cause of heart disease. And, we fast forward to the 1980s and the first version of the US dietary guidelines come out recommending, essentially avoidance of dietary fat, especially saturated fat. That's followed, shortly thereafter by the discovery and release of medications to lower blood cholesterol levels, the statin medications. And, that was the path. It was declared, and I remember this because this is when I was starting medical school, in the 1990s. The prevailing thinking was, we have figured out what causes heart disease, and we're going to cure heart disease, and heart disease will be non-existent again, within 20 years. Here we are, 30, almost 40 years later, and heart disease remains the number one killer, despite this focus on dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol levels. So, that is one of the high-level pieces of information that I look at and say, maybe we got something wrong. Maybe it's not all about cholesterol. And that doesn't mean that cholesterol has nothing to do with heart disease. It's just that it's not the primary driver of heart disease. And in order to really be able to effectively prevent a problem, we have to understand what causes it in the first place. What is the true root cause? And I'm pretty confident at this point saying that cholesterol is not the root cause of heart disease.
So what would you say the root cause is?
Yeah, so I look at insulin resistance, or what I'll call metabolic health. This has been demonstrated to be root cause for the development of heart disease. And we, again, have increasing evidence, and we have lots of evidence from the past that if you address and prevent and reverse insulin resistance, you can very effectively prevent the development and progress of heart disease.
So how do you recommend? Someone comes to you, and what is it that you recommend? Are you recommending a diet? Are you recommending a blood sugar monitor? And would you use statins? Like, would you give them medication as well in the meantime, or?
Well, yeah, all good questions. So again, the first thing we have to understand is kind of what is insulin resistance? What is metabolic health? How do we measure it? And the unfortunate reality is many physicians don't recognize and understand this. It's not something that's emphasized in, medical school. It's not something that the guidelines really talk about. And, again, we've gotten so distracted by the cholesterol issue, and everyone is so focused on cholesterol that we really have, forgotten about insulin resistance. So, like I said, the first step is you have to be able to measure and assess your insulin resistance and your metabolic health. To start with, I encourage people to do basic measures of their metabolic health. There's 5 basic measures that we can look at. And, these are things that are pretty simple. You can check them at home. You can get your, basic blood work to check them. Those 5 basic measures are, first of all, your waist circumference. So again, do this at home. Take a tape measure just above the level of your belly button. Measure it first thing in the morning. The next metric we're going to look at is your blood pressure. High blood pressure is oftentimes one of the first indicators of a metabolic health problem. And again, it unfortunately doesn't get recognized as such. When you go to your doctor and they tell you have high blood pressure, they're usually going to say, just take this medication and that will take care of it. And it may bring your blood pressure down, but it's not addressing the underlying reason why your blood pressure went up in the first place. And then 3 basic blood measures we're going to look at: your fasting blood glucose level, your HDL cholesterol level, and your triglyceride level. And people will probably notice that I did not mention the LDL cholesterol, the one that so many doctors focus on. It is not relevant to metabolic health. So those 5 measures, if people want to know the numbers that they should be looking for, you can just go to my website, ifixhearts.com. I have a free calculator right on the home page there that you can put in your numbers and see if you're metabolically healthy or not. So that's how we start. And then basically it's a matter of what can you do to improve those metrics if they're not where they are. And this is primarily a diet and lifestyle issue. Medications, again, might improve some of these numbers, but they're really not addressing the underlying root cause. And that underlying root cause is firmly grounded in diet and lifestyle, what we eat and what we do.
I've actually heard, and again, maybe I'm repeating something that I heard many years ago, so it could have changed 100 times since, that statins actually cause diabetes, that it actually increased people's, I guess, insulin resistance, because that it was actually causing diabetes in people. I don't know if that's true. I just remember hearing that.
Yeah, it is true. Long-term use of statins has clearly been associated with an increased risk of developing insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And that's problematic because, again, we know that insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes are much bigger risk factors for the development of heart disease than an elevated LDL cholesterol is. Many studies have looked at those 2 factors head to head. One of the more recent ones that I usually cite came out of what was called the Women's Health Initiative. And that study showed that the increase in risk associated with an elevated LDL cholesterol level was about 1.4x. So about a 40% increase if you had elevated LDL versus you didn't have elevated LDL. When they looked at another blood metric, which is called the lipoprotein insulin resistance score, LPIR, they found that measurement being elevated, meaning you were insulin resistant, was associated with a 10 times risk of developing heart disease. So much larger magnitude of risk associated with that. And part of the reason that I think statins have been ineffective in, massively impacting the incidence of heart disease is, yes, in the short term, they lower your cholesterol, and that may have a small impact on your risk of heart disease. But over the long run, they're impairing insulin sensitivity. They're making you more insulin resistant and maybe making you type 2 diabetic, which is going to have a much greater increase in the risk of heart disease.
So could somebody have really high LDL, and is it possible that they're still not insulin resistant? Or hold on, high LDL, yeah, and that they're not insulin resistant. I had to make sure I said that right.
Yes, certainly. LDL, the amount of LDL actually is really not influenced by insulin resistance. Now, one of the other things that is so interesting is the quality of your LDL cholesterol particles are influenced by insulin resistance. So people that are insulin resistant will have smaller LDL particles. And we know that the small LDL particles are the ones that are involved in plaque formation, in the development of atherosclerosis. People who are not insulin resistant tend to have larger LDL particles that are not involved in in plaque formation and atherosclerosis. So, by changing the characteristics, but not necessarily the amount of your LDL cholesterol, is another way that insulin resistance contributes to the development of heart disease. I certainly see plenty of people that have low amounts of LDL cholesterol, and their doctors think everything is fine. But when you look at those advanced metrics, you find that most of their LDL is small, dense LDL, and those people are still at major risk of developing heart disease. And this explains why about half of the patients who come into the hospital with heart attacks have what are considered low or normal LDL cholesterol levels. And again, what I try and get people to focus on is it's not the amount of your LDL cholesterol that matters, it's the quality of your LDL cholesterol that matters.
Okay, so now we need to understand, how would one test the quality of their LDL cholesterol? It doesn't sound like a standard test.
No, it's not a standard test.
Certainly not in Israel.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, this is something we run into. So you want to ask for an advanced lipid panel, or what will be called an NMR panel, where they actually look at the size of your cholesterol particles. And that can be done. It's just that most doctors don't know how to interpret it. In some countries, it might be hard to get. There are some other things that you can look at instead. So, you can measure your insulin level, and you can measure your insulin resistance. There are a number of ways of doing that. A sort of shortcut, a little bit of a cheat, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good, is you take the ratio between your triglycerides and your HDL cholesterol. Now, importantly, this needs to be done, the ratio needs to be calculated working in the US units, the milligrams per deciliter. So if you've gotten it checked in millimole, which is common in Europe and elsewhere, just go online, plenty of calculators, convert it over to milligram per deciliter, divide your triglycerides by your HDL cholesterol. If that number is less than 1.5, that ratio is less than 1.5, that's a pretty good indicator that you are not insulin resistant, and therefore you're probably going to have, the large LDL particles that we're looking for. Not a perfect test, but it's a good start that I have people, start with if they're having challenges getting the advanced testing done.
And do you find many people that come into you that are not insulin resistant these days?
Well, a lot of the people who come to me are already have started to make the lifestyle changes. They've read my book or they've seen information from others. And so those people that are coming in already have started, oftentimes will be insulin sensitive. But the statistics overall are pretty concerning. Again, there was a large study looking at the U.S. adult population. This data was collected in 2016, published in about 2019, and it found that 88% of the adults in the United States were not in optimal metabolic health. So they looked at those 5 measures that I talked about earlier, and only 12% of adults could meet all 5 measures of optimal metabolic health. So pretty scary statistics. And when I look at the population that comes to me as a heart surgeon in that practice, insulin resistance is almost universal. Various studies that have looked at this have shown that people that are coming with heart attacks or people who are coming to have heart bypass surgery done, upwards of 95% of those people are insulin resistant.
Because like you said, you have these 2 different parts of the practice, right? Maybe one is more the functional and the other is the actual surgery. The patients that come to you to get surgery, do you sort of tell them like, I'm going to do the surgery because right now the surgery is necessary, but you have to change your lifestyle afterwards?
Yes, that's exactly what I tell them today. Unfortunately, in the past, before I knew this, it was just, let's do the surgery. But what I now recognize and what I now talk to them about is the surgery isn't addressing the reason that you developed the heart disease in the first place. And if we don't address that, you're going to continue to have issues with heart disease. And again, the statistics show, people who get stents, people who get bypass surgery, the majority of them end up dying of heart disease. Yes, we've extended their life. We've improved the quality of their life by doing these procedures and these surgeries, but they still end up dying of heart disease because we don't address what led to them getting the heart disease in the first place.
So again, this might be crossing over too much. It might not be a question you could really answer. But when people come in like today, are you more, I know, like you said, you want to keep people off your operating table. So if there are people that are referred to you where it's not like an emergency, where like they could give it a couple of months of like diet and lifestyle change before it's absolutely necessary to do the surgery, do you try to convince them to do that first?
Yes, I do. The unfortunate thing about the way that the medical system works is that people usually get referred for me for surgery when they need the surgery. Most of the time it's kind of imminent. But oftentimes, but there are some situations where the surgery isn't quite imminent and we do have time to work on this. And I do encourage them to work on it. And, more often on the surgical side of things, what ends up happening is, like you said earlier, I talk to them, yes, we need to do the surgery, but we also need to address the underlying cause here, the reason that you need the surgery. And, I talk to them about the diet, the lifestyle, all of that stuff. It's hard within the medical system. Again, there isn't a whole lot of focus on preventative care. Our systems aren't really built around that. And I usually, as the surgeon, am only having limited contact with the patient. I see them before I do the surgery. I see them for a short period afterwards. And then, I don't have ongoing care with them as a surgeon. And what really saddens me many times is, I'll do the surgery. I'll talk to them about diet, lifestyle. I'll give them the information. They'll read my book, whatever it is. And occasionally I'll hear back from them, down the line. And they'll say, we listened to everything you said. We understand what you were talking about. We made these dietary changes. And then my family doctor or my cardiologist told me I can't do that because I can't do that diet because that will kill me. And again, because the diet that I recommend is a low carbohydrate and, higher in fat, it's not a low fat diet that we've been kind of brainwashed to believe is best for heart disease. And many times the cardiologist, the family physician will discourage the patient from doing it, despite the fact that they may have already had good success. they lose weight, they get off, they no longer need blood pressure medications or diabetes medications. And, they'll go back to their doctor and all these good things will have happened. But the doctor is so hyper focused on, saturated fat in the diet, and maybe their LDL cholesterol went up some, and will, tell them that despite all those great results, this is actually killing them.
Do any of those doctors ever think, well, maybe I should reach out to this cardiothoracic surgeon who counseled my patient who's recommending something different? Or do most of them, did any of the doctors ever reach out to you to find out, here you are, a heart doctor, and this is what you're recommending? You would think that would clue them in that maybe there's something they're missing. Maybe there's something out there, and especially today, come on, keto is all the rage. I mean, be obvious.
Well, you would hope so. But, again, so many of these doctors are so trapped within the dogma, trapped within the system, that they just can't consider the possibility that, maybe a lot of what they believe and a lot of what they learned is wrong. Now, the good news is I am starting to see more acceptance. I go to the low carb and the metabolic health conferences, and there's increasing number of physicians from all different specialties that are interested in this and are recognizing the power of this. Even among my colleagues, there's more acceptance that this might be a useful, maybe addition. They might not be quite ready to give up the whole cholesterol paradigm as I have, but they said, well, maybe we can do both, I think that's an okay compromise to make, certainly. So I do see hope. I think increasingly the medical practitioners, the medical system, are becoming very frustrated, with, they're getting overwhelmed. There are so many sick people that the reality is that we can't keep up with the demand. So we really need to start looking at why that is and what we can do to change that.
So a regular person, someone listening to this podcast that knows they've been put on statins or blood pressure medication or something like that, what's the best way for them to approach their doctor who maybe put them on these things? Because most of the people listening know I'm a huge advocate of us being our own advocates with our physicians. So do you have something to recommend? What would be a good way for them to speak to their doctor?
Yeah, so I would, encourage those people to bring up, some of the things we've talked about, to ask their doctor, about insulin resistance. And am I insulin resistant? Can you test me for insulin resistance? And hopefully the physician will respond to that. They may, just say, I don't know anything about that. You have to go find help elsewhere. They may be resistant. And that's when I encourage people to, like you said, be their own advocate, to take charge of their health. And maybe it's time to seek out a different physician, a different practitioner who can guide you on this. One of the advantages we have these days is, we have the internet, we have all this connectivity. People like myself, I see patients from all over the US and worldwide via telemedicine. And so you do have other options. You're not, stuck with the doctor who was assigned to you by your insurance company, which is how many people end up choosing their doctor. Now, that may take some extra effort on your part. You have to go seek out other physicians. You may even have to pay money for it. The unfortunate reality is that insurance companies don't value preventative care, and they may not pay for, you to see this other doctor. But I would put forth that that's a very worthwhile investment in your health. And so I definitely encourage, it's one of the main messages in my book, for people to take charge of their health. And this is something you need to actively work on and pursue.
So another little side question that just kind of backs up to what we spoke about. If someone comes in addition to heart problems, they have things like autoimmune disease, do you just sort of know that they're already going to be insulin resistant? Meaning what you're saying has been the theme through many of the people that my listeners have heard and have spoken to, is that insulin resistance is sort of like the root cause of so much disease today.
Yeah, so autoimmunity can be its own problem, but again, it kind of shares a common pathway with insulin resistance, and that is that it causes inflammation. We know that, many autoimmune disorders are associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, and it's because of the inflammation. And that inflammation then ends up damaging the blood vessels. So, having an autoimmune disorder doesn't guarantee that you're insulin resistant. You can have autoimmune without insulin resistance, but it still leads to the inflammation, which is ultimately what is damaging blood vessels and leading to cardiovascular disease. So I do believe it's very important to address that. And similar to insulin resistance, it turns out that a lot of the autoimmunity is related to the foods that we are eating. So maybe sort of coincidental, maybe by design, it ends up being the same solution, although, you're coming at it from a different approach.
So how do you eat? What is it that you eat? Could you tell us a little about your diet, maybe what a typical day is?
Yeah, sure thing. So I eat a primarily carnivorous diet these days. Over the past, 8 years, I've kind of evolved from, sort of sugar elimination, gluten elimination at first, to more of a traditional, I guess people would call keto, low carb. And then about 4 years ago, I decided to try a carnivore approach and had even better results. I find it easier to maintain. I'm not tracking things. I'm not counting carbs. I just eat animal products. I eat when I'm hungry. I eat until I'm full. And that is, works very well for me. So on a typical day, I'm going to eat once or twice, kind of depending on how busy I am, how hungry I am. Typically, don't really eat in the mornings. And when I, maybe mid-afternoon to early evening, when I get done with things, I'll eat, and I might eat again a few hours later. I typically eat somewhere between 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of meat between those 1 or 2 meals. Mostly red meat, but I do eat eggs. I eat a fair amount of seafood. I eat, not just beef, but other things like lamb and some of the game meats. And it's kind of simple, but it works very well for me.
Okay, I've been dying to ask somebody this. Okay, I guess if you say you eat meat, it's pretty easy. But when you go out to dinner or you go to a friend's house, because I guess you can always order meat. But that's really always the question I'm thinking, and I always forget to ask people. What about like you go out to dinner with friends? I mean, I guess you just eat the meat, right? You don't eat.
Yeah, pretty much whatever. Just eat. I'll order a good steak and sometimes a side of maybe some shrimp or a piece of fish as my side dish. That's pretty much it. On an occasional basis, I might have a little something else, maybe a baked potato or something like that. But the honest truth is, the meat is what I enjoy eating, and it's the most nutritious thing I know I can be eating. Doing that, has gotten me in the best shape of my life. I feel good every day. So why wouldn't I continue doing it? And, oh, by the way, I've done all the tests on my heart because I know people are going to worry about
I was just about to ask you that. Yeah.
Yep. and no evidence of cardiovascular disease, despite a strong family history of cardiovascular disease, having, like I said in the past, all the sort of risk factors. But I continue to monitor that. And, I really have no worries about my cardiovascular health. I do it because I know people are going to say, wait, you're a heart surgeon, you're eating all this meat, what about your heart? And so I've now had 2 coronary artery calcium scans, very important test that I encourage people to get. It shows us heart disease at its earliest stages. And both of those scans show a 0 score. So I am doing very well from a cardiovascular standpoint.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's very cool to hear because it's so not the norm, right? To hear a cardiothoracic surgeon who's a carnivore. It's like, it's not what you expect to hear. So I like that. There's a word I'm looking for. It's just not coming to me. But yeah, but I like that contrast of what you think and what you are. And it's there's a word for that, but I'm forgetting it. But anyway, so let me ask you one other question about the heart. What about things like stress? Does that play a big factor into people? And maybe I don't know, maybe a big factor into cholesterol. I don't know.
Yeah, it certainly does. So, I talk about, diet, I kind of say is the base of your pyramid, as you're constructing your healthy lifestyle. But there are other things that go into it, and sleep and stress and activity are 3 other major factors that we need to consider. We know that stress can be a major contributor to cardiovascular disease. We know that stress can lead to insulin resistance. Stress leads to inflammation. Stress leads to many hormonal changes in your body that are going to promote higher levels of blood sugar. So stress is problematic. Now, I recognize that the world we are in is very stressful, and we all have stress, around us all the time. And so, what I tell people is you can't eliminate stress, but you can manage your stress. You have to find whatever it is that you can use so that you can kind of offload and deal with that stress. And that, takes many different forms for different people. It's your community, it's, things like meditation, religion, all of these things can help us to better deal with the stress that's all around us.
Makes a lot of sense. And as far as physical activity, what are you recommending these days as far as?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing when it comes to physical activity is building and maintaining muscle. And there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, lots of evidence, lots of scientific evidence that the better that we are able to maintain muscle as we age, it increases not only the length of our life, but the quality of our life. So very important to build and maintain muscle. Muscle is also very metabolically active. And, the more muscle you have, the less likely you are to be insulin resistant. They go hand in hand. So I always, encourage people to prioritize resistance exercise and muscle building activities. Cardio, activities are great if you have time and the desire to do them. But recognize that cardio is an ineffective weight loss strategy. Again, we have many, many studies showing that. And so, for those of us that have limited time that we're going to put towards exercise, I always want to prioritize that resistance exercise. Now, hand in hand with that, I encourage people to just get as much extra activity throughout their day as possible. And these can be simple things things like using a stand-up desk instead of sitting, taking that 10-minute walk after you eat, or in the middle of your workday. Just simple things like that get some extra activity spread throughout our day. And you don't necessarily have to worry then about going to the gym for the hour and running on the treadmill.
It's great. I love hearing you say that because, again, people are still so entrenched in this idea of needing hours and hours and hours of cardio. And so it's so great to hear you say that you do prioritize muscle building. So, well, this has been fascinating. Everything you've said is I think, incredible information, not the norm, not what we're used to hearing. And I really love it. So let me ask you, what does spirituality mean to you?
Spirituality to me means just treating the people around you well, and wanting best and doing best for the people around you.
That's great. Thank you. Everybody's got their own definition, and I appreciate hearing everybody's. And where's the best place for people to find you?
Yeah, so I Fix Hearts. You can go to my website, ifixhearts.com. Over on Twitter, where I'm most active on social media, it's I Fix Hearts as well. I am on Instagram. There you'll find me at Ovadia Heart Health. Thankfully, my name isn't super common, so if you just search it, you'll find it. And then the book, Stay Off My Operating Table, widely available at all the usual places. And I encourage people to go check that out as well.
Perfect. We'll link everything. Can I ask you the origin of your name?
So it is a Hebrew name, Ovadia. You're probably well aware, one of the prophets in the Old Testament. More commonly, a first name over in Israel. And the prevailing theory in my family is that the name got switched somewhere along the way and became our last name. It's a less common last name, certainly.
Are you Sephardic? Because it tends to be a Sephardic name also.
Yes.
Okay. Just a little side note. Well, thank you so much. This has really been fascinating. I really appreciate it and appreciate your taking the time.
Great talking with you, and love sort of the concept of your program and all that you're doing. Just thank you for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm here with my friend, Malka Hubscher. She has been teaching in women's learning and seminaries for over 20 years. You guys have heard her a couple times before. I love listening to her. She always has incredible things to tell us, and I can't wait here to see. I cannot wait to hear what she has to say. Get the words out of my mouth. So Malka, how are you? How have you been?
Okay, good. I had a really interesting experience listening to the podcast that you sent me about heart health, and which was eye-opening and enlightening. And I was thinking about what does that have to, how can we relate that to our values found in the Torah? So these few weeks we're reading the Parshiot, the Sedras, about what's going on in Egypt. And we know that the way the Torah describes Paro's refusal of letting the Jewish people out is that he's hardening his heart. And what happens is that basically when the Torah wants to describe someone being stubborn, then it is describing the hardening the heart. And from here we learned that the heart is really like the seat of a person's will. And refusal to acknowledge God and to free the Jewish people from enslavement is described as hardening his heart, that he refused to let them leave. And then as a result of constant refusal, eventually God actually hardened Paro's heart and said, if you refuse so many times, like if we're not good to our heart and we're not good to our will, then God will respond by saying, okay, Paro, then he basically lost his free will. And that's described as God hardening his heart. So from this story that we've been really discussing over the past few Parshiot, you already start thinking about the heart as the source of a person's will. And specifically with the evil Paro, but later on in the Torah, in Sefer Devarim, and many, many times in the Torah, God tells us that we have to worship God with all of our heart. Over and over, we say it in the Shema, and we see in chapter 10 of Devarim, the Torah talks about that we have to. The Torah says, Hashem, Ma Hashem Shoel, Ma Hashem Elokecha Shoel Mimcha. What does God even ask from you? What does God want from us in our lives? And the answer is to fear God and to follow in his ways and to love God with all of our heart and all of our soul. And we see that in many ways. And we have to have like sort of total commitment is described as loving God with all of our heart. But what's interesting about this time in the 10th chapter in Devarim versus perhaps other times where we are commanded to love Hashem with our heart, here we also have the negative. At the end of that little section, it says in the Torah, Umaltem et orlat levavchem. And this is a metaphoric image. It literally means you have to circumcise your heart. And ve'orpechem lo tikshu od. And you have to remove the stiffness or the stubbornness from your neck. So in the same few psukim, we have the repeated mantra of the Torah to serve Hashem with all your heart, which we understand is like total commitment, love, fear, following in God's ways. But here we also have the opposite. And the opposite is to remove anything that is preventing that total commitment to God on your heart. And you can even describe this in the spiritual world as the thickening of the heart. And we have to remove anything that is thickening of the heart. And if we think about heart health in the physical world, and we think about there's so much buildup around our arteries and this thickening of the arteries that come from poor health habits and how we have to really protect the health and the security and safety of our heart, because that is perhaps the most important to our overall health. So the Torah is telling us exactly the same thing in the spiritual world. In order to fully commit yourself, you not only need the positive of to serve Hashem with all your heart, but you also have to remove anything that is preventing that total connection to Hashem. So we must, in a metaphoric way, remove any of the foreskins on our heart, which means remove those barriers that are preventing our heart from being spiritually healthy. So we have to think of ways to both commit ourselves to God, and we have to think about those things that are barriers. And the Ramban explains that what does that mean to remove those barriers or remove that thickening or literally the foreskin of our heart? The Ramban explains it means to have an open heart that is willing to hear the truth, internalize it, and I think remove that skepticism and that cynicism and that judgment that really prevents ourselves from having a healthy spiritual life. So on the one hand, we have to commit ourselves because I think spiritually we may have a lot of buildup around our hearts. Things that are skepticism are the things that prevent us from having an open mind. And I think we often think about an open mind, but maybe the Torah is telling us don't only have an open mind, but have an open heart. And the rest of the pasuk describes that you can't be stiff-necked and stubborn, and they really go hand in hand. The willingness to change and the willingness to be open and not the willingness to be stuck in our ways. And that's true of our health habits, like we learned on the podcast, as well as in our spiritual habits. And I think in a similar vein, there's a very well-known teaching in the Sefer HaChinuch, which is a 13th century book about mitzvot. Now, we don't know actually the author of the Sefer HaChinuch, but it was a book written from a father to a son, and it goes through the 613 commandments. And over in many of the mitzvot, there's this teaching that the Baal Sefer HaChinuch, the author of the Sefer HaChinuch, teaches that maybe even come up before in different of your podcasts. It's an idea of acharei ha'peulot nimshachim ha'levavot, or acharei ha'ma'asim nimshachim ha'levavot. That means basically is act first and then your heart will come after. And that our actions really come first and then our heart will come. It's almost like the very famous mantra of fake it till you make it. So very often in our spiritual life, we think, okay, when my heart is into it, then my actions will follow. But the Sefer HaChinuch teaches us this really important message. is that sometimes it's actually the opposite, that first act, and then you'll see that your heart will follow. And I think that's very true in the physical world when we talk about moving and exercising and putting good food into our body. If our heart is healthy, the rest of our body will be healthy. And you have to move and you have to act first, and then your heart will benefit. And maybe that's also what the idea that we find in the Sefer HaChinuch is that acharei pa'ulot nimshachim al levavot, literally movement, that we, how important exercise and movement and good habits are, but also religiously. And when it's a book about mitzvot, so very often I think the popular notion would be, okay, so I'll learn about a mitzvah, I'll connect to the mitzvah, and then I'll do it. But from the Sefer HaChinuch, we actually learn the opposite. First do the mitzvah, and then you will see that after the actions, your heart will come, and then you will connect to it. And I think that is true also what we learned about in our physical health as well as in our spiritual health. So the heart is actually, we say that the neshama, where is our spiritual side of us? It's in the mind and it's in the heart. And the mind-heart connection, that again, open mind, open heart, and to remove those skepticism from our mind and our heart, the orlat halev, and this idea of committing ourselves to action. And then we will see that our vigor and our excitement in our spiritual world will actually follow. And I think whatever we learned in the physical world is true in the spiritual world. And whatever we learn in the spiritual world is also true in the physical world. So when I was listening to the podcast, I think these two ideas just really follow. That don't wait till you feel the inspiration. First do it. Get out and exercise, take a walk, eat good food, and then you'll see that your heart will be healthy. And that's true with mitzvot as well. So those are the ideas that I think can really follow from the teachings in the physical world and in the spiritual world.
That was fantastic. I really, really love how you connected that. It really fits so beautifully, and exactly what you're saying. It's these parshiot that we're reading, even though this is going to come out probably in a few weeks, but this was fantastic. Thank you so, so much.
Pleasure, Dara. Keep up doing your good work.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. Please seek guidance from a trusted healthcare professional. By listening to this podcast, you release Holy Health and any of our guests from all liability. I'd like to thank Joker Productions for editing this podcast.